Hello, the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another update to the Canadian federal election forecast. So, we've had a whole plethora of polls in the last about 10 days. We've had an Abacus poll, we've had Ledger polls, we have Ipsos, Angus Reid, Main Street, all fully locked in and thrown the model. I've, for now, I've decided not to put the Nanos polls in momentarily, not because I think there's anything wrong with the polls per se. I just don't see them being, or I just don't want to cloud post-Poilievre leadership data with pre-Poilievre leadership data. So in about 2 weeks or so, I'll probably starting looking at adding Nanos polls back into the model again. It's just the nature of rolling. I don't want to have rolling data percolating through right now, because every pollster, all these other pollsters have all shown a very large 3 to 5 point bump for Poilievre becoming leader from pre-leader, so don't need to cloudy that up. I've also decided to exclude ECOS, and I will likely be excluding ECOS for the by default going forward, only including them on a case-by-case basis of the poll, or if, such as the Quebec election right now, I just don't have enough polls, so even a subpar poll will be included. I'm going to be going into the reasons for that on Friday, the 30th of September, for people watching this in the future. Why I'm treating ECOS this way, but that is the story. That said, let us break into the forecast. So, I keep doing this. So, I am also changing, I'm sure you've all noticed, I have a riding level map now. If you like a riding level map versus my old style provincial level map, let me know below in the comments below. This is a bit more work, but I think it does add information. If you don't think it adds information, or you don't think it's clear, or it's too messy, let me know. I can work on that going forward. And I'm also having this map colored by margin of victory instead of by percentage of the party winning. So one place where that is quite obvious is Fort McMurray. The Conservatives are not getting more than 20, they are getting more than 20% of the vote, but they're getting probably 80% of the vote in Fort McMurray or Grand Prairie over here. So technically saying that they're more than plus 20 margins also kind of underballing it, but I didn't think an extra row of colors was that useful, because it's pretty much just the Conservatives who would make any use of that. So cartographically, it might look like it's slightly underestimating the Conservative vote, but I feel like the shade of blue is sufficiently dark to indicate that this is domination of these ridings. So, with that additional in them, let's get into the main stuff. So, I think this is pretty much the nail in the coffin to a fall election. The fall election hypothesis that I've had for the last couple of weeks was more like the last couple months, was pretty much predicated that Poilievre wasn't going to do massively better immediately over Candice Bergen / the party being leaderless, depending on how you want to look at that. If that was true, then this possibly could have been a good chance, because the Liberals were neck and neck with the Conservatives before this last week of polls. But add in about 5 polls that range from Conservative +5 to Conservative +8, and now the Conservatives are leading by a hefty margin here, up 38 seats in the popular vote. In fact, this looks very similar to the 2019 election result, or the 2020 election result, but in a different form. So why did this happen? Well, I think most people who actually are being honest in their assessments knew Poilievre was going to boost the Conservative Party. In my case, I thought that Poilievre was going to be much more successful as a leader and much higher vote ceiling than O'Toole or Scheer or even Bergen had. The discrepancy in where my previous assessment was coming in is I didn't think it would be this quick. Now, in my mind, and based on my previous estimations, I think Poilievre's realistic vote ceiling is probably similar to where Main Street currently has him, about 41. I think that's likely his plausible ceiling. If he starts getting much above that, that isn't because he's gaining voters, it's because other people are not going to vote. So, that might be semantically different, but I think there is some people might argue it's semantically different, I should say, but I think there is a significant difference between the Conservatives gaining 1 million votes and the Liberals losing votes and the Conservatives gaining none. I think it's very plausible that in the current environment that Poilievre might theoretically outperform this if Trudeau voters or Singh voters are unhappy with their parties and just are disillusioned and don't vote. But barring that, if we assume 2021 levels of turnout, I think 41% might be Poilievre's upper bound. I think upper bound, realistically, that is. I think that is where he could end up, but I don't think you get up much further than that, if that makes sense. Similar to how Harper's upper bound is around 40. It's a similar deal. But unlike 2011, there's a lot of other circumstances going on that I think slightly increase Poilievre's upper bound, if that makes sense. So, I thought that this was going to be a steady gain. Because you look at a lot of polling on this, and Poilievre is well known among Conservatives, but he's still not that well known among everybody else. I think he has 60% of people have formed opinions on him based on Abacus. It's like 29 for, 35 against, so it's like 66, 64, something like that. So there's still a lot of people who don't have opinions on him. So my previous assumption was that as he gained more opinions, he would gain some vote share. But this is huge. He's in the span, if we pop here, even in my model where I've been estimating the Conservatives a lot higher, the last full forecast or update I did before the Conservative leadership race, the Conservatives are at 36 and a bit, and now they're up a whole 2 percentage points. So that's a big gain. That's actually bigger than I was expecting, because I was expecting Poilievre to come in and might push them maybe to 37. 38 is, 38 and a half really, is very high. Unfortunately, Trudeau's vote is extremely efficient. So and the NDP's vote is extremely, extremely inefficient. So it's very likely that this would actually be, as shown here, just a Conservative minority, even with an 8-point lead in popular vote, likely a Conservative minority. So, I keep clicking on the map and causing that to happen. Sorry about that. So, what's going on here? Like, how can the Liberals just be that efficient? Well, this thing is, a lot of rural Canada aren't Liberal voters. It's not a situation where it's, for example, much of the West is not Liberal versus Conservative outside of the cities. It's Conservative versus the NDP, and the NDP get completely clowned on in most of them. Some of these ridings in Western BC or around here, the NDP can win depending on the Conservatives' performance, or relative performance of the two parties, or like Northern Saskatchewan, for example, or Northern Manitoba. It is a possible win for the NDP. But a lot of these ridings, it's just not a contest. But the NDP does get more vote share than the Liberals. So, in this regard, the Conservatives are competing against both the Liberals and the NDP, and the NDP are sort of competing with the Liberals pretty much only in the Greater Vancouver area and downtown Toronto. and I guess London, Ontario, I guess technically, and I guess Hamilton. So, wow, I keep adding places. So, Hamilton, London, downtown Vancouver, and downtown Toronto are pretty much the only spots where there's meaningful Liberal NDP contests, and the NDP get dabbed on most of them. The NDP are quite weak politically in a lot of these cities, because even with the NDP vote share around 20%, again, a lot of their vote share are in ridings where they get blown out by the Conservatives. Like, even right here, I can't think of the name of this riding here, but the NDP currently hold it. My model, they're currently down like 15 percentage points. That's blowout numbers. And this isn't... And this is just across the board. And it really isn't that surprising, because Singh's actions have really alienated more rural voters. The NDP under Singh have pivoted very hard to the university-educated, hyper-urban crowd. And you see, in effectively all of the rural ridings previously held by the NDP in Northern Ontario, Western BC, Northern Manitoba, they're all getting wiped out. They're only barely holding on to rural Victoria Island, one of the most left-wing places in Canada, historically. And Nunavut doesn't really count because they have a quite popular incumbent there in a riding that has very few people. So the incumbent really matters. In the territories in general, the incumbent matters quite a bit. So this is just it's not really a contest. If that NDP candidate retires, yeah, the Nunavut's in play probably in a three-way race. But otherwise, she's likely going to keep winning in Nunavut. So, in this regard, the NDP are just so inefficient everywhere that it actually amplifies how good the Liberals are. Because again, you look at, for example, Toronto here. You have Brampton, you have Mississauga here. The Liberals are typically between +8 and +15 range in those 10 ridings. You look at rural Alberta, rural Saskatchewan, the Conservatives are typically +40 to +70 range. And each of these ridings has a very similar number of voters. So the Conservatives absolutely blow out some of these districts, whereas the Liberals are just doing good in them. Same story in Ottawa-Gatineau. Same story in PEI. Same story in Halifax. Same story in most of Vancouver. Most of these ridings are not won by the Liberals by a huge margin. They win by a comfortable margin. And that's the Liberal voter efficiency. It's very much real. The only place where there's actually extreme amounts of inefficient voting for the Liberals, relatively speaking, is the island of Montreal, where in a lot of these ridings they're winning by 30 or 40 points. Though, not the same 30, 40 points you might see in rural BC. We're talking about 50% of, around 50, 60% of the vote in some of these ridings on the island of Montreal. Whereas, like rural BC, you might be seeing 60 or 70% of the vote going Conservative. So, in a lot of regards, the Liberals have a very easy time denying a majority to the Conservatives. And I think that's probably going to be staying that way going forward, because again, the most recent round of polling, they had the polls that did have this, Angus Reid and Ledger, they did have the Conservatives doing slightly better in the suburbs and urban areas across the country, but not wildly better. But they had the Conservatives wildly doing better in rural areas, which is one of the reasons why you see Northern Ontario dark blue now. And a lot of Newfoundland, for example. It's actually at the point, if this last round of polls is to be fully believed, that it's not inconceivable that the Liberals might or not even just Liberals, the Conservatives might sweep every area that's not a major city. If again, you go back here, Conservatives are at 38 and a bit. If the Conservatives get around 40%, I think it is perfectly plausible that every riding west of Quebec, that's not the territories, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Toronto, downtown Hamilton specifically, and Ottawa might all go Conservative. So, Windsor, London, maybe not Strathcona, Edmonton, but Victoria Island, the rest of Kitchener, like a lot of these places. All places are not the densest urban areas in Western Canada, and this is west of Quebec, might all go Conservative. And it's very possible that you might even see places like Fredericton, Cape Breton, or Victoria, Sydney, even Hants East, / the Valley in Nova Scotia, St. John's Rosse, also very possible. If the number track continues and Poilievre gets to the point where I see him around 40. If Poilievre does get there, I think that would be a majority just based on the math here. Like if we just want to count this up live, we have east to west, we probably pick up, or he could probably pick up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So just 17 I could see quite readily on just a first pass count here as I pointed them out to you. And that would be Conservative majority if Poilievre goes up to around 40%, and it's not gaining that by blowing out Alberta, Saskatchewan. Because right now, the polls aren't saying he's getting up there by blowing out Alberta, Saskatchewan, though he's technically blowing out Saskatchewan, I guess. But it's not because he's blowing out Alberta. Look at the recent round of polls. Actually, it's best seen here. So from the 4th, we'll just close the 18th one, because the 18th is not super relevant right now. So, from the 4th, he's up 2 points in BC, 3.3 in Alberta, 3.3 in Saskatchewan, 4.4 in Manitoba, 1.7 in Ontario, 1.5 in Quebec, and Atlantic Canada as a whole, because even though I'm from here, no one cares about the individual provinces out here. He's up 2.5. So this isn't the case that he's gaining support only out west, which some people have said or speculated, or even asserted baselessly. No, he's gaining support everywhere. In fact, his Quebec numbers, my model has him down closer to 21.4, but there's been some polls recently. I think it's Ledger who had them as high as 28 in Quebec. Now, 28% in Quebec really doesn't do anything at all for the Conservatives. Their vote... Oh, it was 25 in Quebec, sorry. Their vote is way too inefficient in Quebec to really go anywhere. And in a lot of ways, the bloc vote is really efficient, because if we see here, like the Conservative area is around right here to here. If they gain... let's say 5 points in Quebec to 26. Trois-Rivières, sure thing. Beauport-Lemieux, why not? St. Maurice-Champlain, possible. Beauport blah 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 blah. It's possible. And maybe Jonquière. Maybe. This one's a bit of a stretch, but this is maybe. And then you run into, you can expand in these, but these are super block. These are like block by like plus like 30. Over here, you can gain ground, but this is block like plus 30. This is block plus 30. So the Conservatives would need to gain so many votes, it's not very likely. And they don't really gain much votes over here, down here, because around Montreal and around the U.S. border area, it seems the voters there are more left-leaning than the rest of Canada. Either that or they just don't trust the Conservatives. That is also a possibility. So they just are more inclined, if they don't want the Bloc, to vote Liberal. Historically, that's how it's been. And it's very difficult, as a result, for the Conservatives to gain much ground. Because they're basically outside of the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ridings I pointed out. They're pretty much butting heads immediately with the core of the Bloc. The Conservatives in Quebec basically only gain ridings where there's a lot of Francophones, but that's where the Bloc is super popular, and the Bloc is way more popular among Francophones than the Conservatives are. So that's kind of the issue in Quebec, with the Conservative vote share. Though on the flip side, the Bloc would have to gain an eye-watering amount of votes to actually start eroding some of these Conservative seats. They'd need to be getting close to like 50% of the vote in Quebec to actually start taking many of these seats away. And as you see, they're only around 31.5. At 40, they could probably flip Chickamauti, if that's how you pronounce that. And then once you get close to 40 or 45, 50, you might start taking some of these Quebec City ones from the Conservatives, but it's not super likely. So where does this put everything here? Well, and one of the big questions people are having is this going to be sustainable? Is this just a temporary boost for the Conservatives? Is this just a fleeting moment? I'm inclined to say no. It is possible, I will not completely discard it, that this might just be a new leader honeymoon period, and in the span of the next 4 months, it might decay back to where it was. Maybe. However, the reason I don't think that is the case is Poilievre's biggest issues, housing, inflation, the economy, are the ones that the Canadians care about. You look at polls that ask people their most concerned issues. Those 3 are always in the top 5. The only other ones in the top 5 are one's climate change, and I don't recall the other one. I think it might be something related to natives. Native reconciliation, maybe? I don't know. It's the 5th one. So, healthcare. It's healthcare, that's what it is. I think reconciliation's 6, typically. So, Poilievre's biggest core issues are some of the most important issues to Canadians right now, and inflation isn't meaningfully going down right now. It's trending down, but it's still very high, and to a lot of people, like the price to fight for this inflation going down right now is very high interest rates. Though I'll get into this some point in the future, maybe November, when I actually do my series I want to do on the economy in the West. We'll get into that in November probably. But the interest rates going up are probably actually a good thing in the long run, though I will be honest, a lot of people are getting hurt in the short term. But again, I'm going to cover that in the future. And a lot of economists, though, to go back to the main topic, are expecting a big recession in the the winter. EU, I've already seen numbers by Deutsche Bank that are suggesting EU might see 2%. The entire Europe, EU, that is, might see 2% decline in GDP this winter alone. Not month over month, year over year. 2% year over year just from the winter alone because of energy shortages. That would be the biggest recession in Europe since World War II. Which, frankly probably means the biggest recession in Europe since the Great Depression, because I don't really like, technically I think there was a recession in the late 40s, early 50s in Europe, but that's like because of the damage from the war, so it's kind of not a fair comparison. There's already people, I mean, the US is pretty much already in a recession. The last quarter was only negative 0.1 growth, I believe, so like it's marginal, but that is 2 quarters. All of the other numbers are going in the wrong way too, economically, so even the people who are trying to be like 2 quarters isn't the formal definition, yeah, go kill yourself. You're wrong, first off, and second, all the indicators are going in the wrong way. It's a recession. Canada's doing decent in comparison at the moment, but again, most of these forecasts are for the winter. So we see the winter and we see even a mild recession combined with inflation, and what is that? Oh, that's stagflation. We're already shedding jobs as well. So none of this is good news economically, good news fiscally. And these are the issues that Poilievre are hitting the best and hitting the hardest, and people trust him the most with. Whereas Trudeau has very little on the housing. I guess the housing agenda, the central banks raising interest rates will actually make that better, but I'm not sure if he'll be long enough, and I'm not sure if it getting better because of interest rates going up is something that Trudeau will get credit for. He might still be blamed for it, and he might actually get blamed on both ends. He might get blamed for the rise in prices, and he might get blamed for all of the people who were misled by the central bank into big home loans by them saying they're going to keep rates stable for several years. They got locked in on variable rates, and now they're getting slapped because of the rates going up. So Trudeau very well could be getting blamed from both ends there. So all this to say, I do think Poilievre's numbers are probably going to keep going up in the near future. Especially, we'll probably see a big bump come around the early spring, or late winter, early spring, if the recession does occur there, as most people are forecasting. And I don't really see the numbers cooling off much. The only thing I think that would sink Poilievre right now is if he did a pivot and started acting more centrist in a lot of regards. Because the core issues that matter to people who are voting for him, again by polls, the fiscal responsibility, the housing, those are good. Those policies don't offend his core base, and they kind of express the olive branch people who are on the fence. And I personally know many people who have previously voted NDP or Liberal who are considering voting Poilievre because of his discussion and policies on housing and the economy. But his core issues for the conservative base, defunding the CBC, overturning the May 1st gun ban, stuff like that, there's no incentive to change those, because you look at voters. Main Street did a poll on this. Almost the entire Conservative Party and almost all previous People's Party voters support defunding the CBC completely. Strongly or very strongly so. But even among the NDP and the Liberals, it's still, I think, 32% of Liberals support defunding the CBC. Oh, well, that's not that divisive. If you think the Conservatives will ever get 32% of the Liberals that affected them, you're high as a kite. That just won't happen. 32% of the Liberals would put the Conservatives right now at almost 50% support. Like that, in a 6 quasi 7 what you consider all of the other parties' system, you're not going to get a party with 50% of the vote. That's just almost impossible. Not literally impossible, but almost impossible. You need something really good going for them. So that 32% by Main Street probably represents the maximum ground he could gain in the Liberals. So there's no incentive there to pivot on that because those people like that policy. 16% strongly liked the idea to defund the CPC. The idea that Poilievre is going to even get 16% of 2021 Liberal voters to vote for him is also laughable. So you don't need to make your policies to change on that policy in that regard, because you probably have more voters in the Liberal Party like the policy than will ever vote for you, if you're Poilievre. And the one on firearms I've hammered on many times in the past, and if you're getting tired of this one, comment below and let me know. But there's not a single person in all of Canada who strongly cares about gun control in a affirmative way. They want more gun control. No person who strongly wants more gun control will ever vote Conservative. End of story. At every step of the way, at every single gun control proposal, the Conservative Party, or members of the Conservative Party, or supporters of the Conservative Party have fought tooth and nail to stop it or overturn it. Why would pro-gun control people ever vote for the Conservatives then? It would be like the rabbit, like, I'll use less than Henry words here, the extremely pro-choice people voting Conservative. It doesn't make sense. Maybe some of the lukewarm people who aren't very concerned about it or are only mildly pro-choice, maybe. Maybe some people who are only lukewarm on guns, maybe. There's no incentive for the people who are very, very strongly feeling on those issues to vote Conservative. And there never will be unless the Conservative Party completely purges all of the Conservatives from the Conservative Party and starts anew with a different party. But then all of the now purged members of the party will just form a new party. And we're back to square zero. There's no point. So in that regard, there's literally no incentive to do it, because the people who don't like that policy will probably never vote for you anyways. And second, as I said in the last video, you do need something big and something controversial. I don't think this is really big enough or controversial enough. But in absence of that, I think this is actually a good idea, even if it's controversial and even if people think it's a really big deal. I think it's neither, but if we assume it was, that's still a good idea electorally, because you need something big that your base likes that is going to encourage them to vote. Some reason why they should vote. Some reason why they should care. But with that, though, I don't want to carry this one on too long, because I expect we'll probably be seeing a lot more polls now going forward in Canada. So if that is correct, we should see more updates for this. If it's not correct, I'll probably just throw up this on updates if I have things I want to talk about, even if there's not actually that many changes. But otherwise, I mean, if you liked the video, please like, share, subscribe. Comment below what you think of the new map. If you see any ridings that I might be completely off base on, there's 338, so if there's one riding where there's a super popular incumbent and you are from there and you can vouch for that, let me know, because I can account for that. I just don't personally know every single riding, and my research time of one person, I can't really get there. If you see something that looks obviously wrong, let me know, because I do sometimes make mistakes. I have been known to type the wrong province, or the wrong riding data in. That does happen occasionally. So if something looks just obviously wrong and I haven't caught it, let me know. Otherwise, make sure you share the video with everybody. Helps the channel out. And I will see you, I guess, Friday with some discussions on Ecos as a polling firm. But with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you Friday.